Winning isn't everything, but the will to win is everything. Most don't know that when Lombardi said that, he was referring to economically and militarily crushing galactic rivals who oppose one's rise to the top of the galaxy through any means necessary. Which is what we'll be doing today. Winning. It's a good reason to play a game. It's fun, especially when the win feels well earned and was difficult to achieve. Winning in Orbit Economica is optional. The galaxy's wide open, and if you want to make money in an infinite sandbox, that's awesome. But for players who want a hard set of metrics to win or lose by, we need a framework to allow total victory. Orbit Economica at its core is all about symbiosis and the relationships between galactic entities. And thus, what better system to use for winning than the relationship between guilds and nations? To win as a player, you do not need to just make your guild the more prosperous, far-reaching, and most powerful. You must choose a nation to back and act as an elusive, erudite kingmaker behind the scenes or at stage center, raising your naive protege to become the undisputed galactic champion. Together as a team with equal ambition, you can go from a tiny irrelevant guild with one fleet to your name and a backwater planet to conquerors of the galaxy. And now, with that grand vision laid out, I just have to actually make all that happen with code and GUIs and design and proper balancing. First up, what should even be measured as the indicators of a nation being successful? Planets, population, and production are what I settled on, with some military prowess thrown in as well. Planets and population are metrics for how large a nation was able to expand and how well cared for their pops were during that time. Production is a measure of how economically successful and large a nation was able to get, and military readiness is a crude indicator of how well stockpiled a nation's planets were with military goods. Together, these three metrics would become the final score as a ranking system. Here, you can see me drawing out what I would like the GUI to look like for an in-game screen that will show all this data to the player mid-game so that they can track their progress and see their standing in the global ranks. After mocking up what I wanted the GUI to look like in Excalidraw, I went over to Unity and created it for real and hooked up the game logic in order to update it on each turn. Here you can see it in its mostly finalized form. You'll notice that all the calculations are made public to the player so they can understand exactly what's going on, and the final calculation is shown on the bottom there alongside the overall galactic ranking. I'm still deciding on how far into a new game should the player select a nation to back, which here you can see me working on in Unity. What is interesting about this decision is that the player can basically select which difficulty they are playing on if the decision is timed correctly. If the player guild is off to a fantastic start and they want something more challenging, picking a weak nation that is on the back foot and then trying to revive and thrive could be fun. On the other hand, if the player is new or struggling, they could pick the most powerful, dominant nation at this point in the game and have an easier time leading that already somewhat successful nation to victory. I modified my existing notification setup to handle multiple choices instead of only accept or decline, and then created a new notification that allows the player to pick the nation they wish to back. Next up was the in-game final screen, the culmination of a game's work and an overview of the final standings. Here I am laying out the design I want to achieve in Unity with the top 3 nations and some data about both the player and the player's chosen nation. This draws inspiration from Victoria 2's end screen, which I always enjoyed screenshotting at the end of both good and bad games. I already had a game over screen for if the player went bankrupt, so I modified that code to work alongside the normal game over end of game screen I now want to add as well. There is another balancing question of how long a game should run for. I see merits of both longer and shorter time frames, so perhaps I will kick this decision back to the player to decide at game creation. This feels a tad boring though for being the culmination of a game well played, so I hopped into Blender and created some cones, flipped the color in Krita, and then threw them into constantly rotating rays around the medals. Then I quickly placed in a glossy animation for the first place medal. And there, that looks much better. Speaking of game creation, currently all games are only in sandbox mode at the start, so I had to modify my new game GUI to allow the player to decide if they want to play with no end and no rules forever to their heart's content, or if they want to play kingmaker mode. I also added some brief descriptions using the custom tooltip system describing what each mode entails. And that about wraps up my initial work with win conditions and game modes. There remain some questions regarding balancing and specifics, but the core systems are now in place and ready to test. If you want to see more Orbit Economica game dev, then please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.